In today's world and workplace, big is often seen as best. So we pursue the big titles, the big positions, and the big teams. But studies show that big doesn't always equal to more happiness or greater impact. Webster's dictionary defines the word little as not big. Really, that is the definition of the word little. But it's also small in size, quantity, or volume. I remember growing up in Miami, Florida. I was raised by three powerful, dynamic women. My mama and my grandma. We didn't call them my dear. We didn't call them Grandma Johnson. We didn't call them Grandma Davis. It was my mama and my grandma. Now, my grandmama Johnson, which I will use for today because she would probably be rolling over in her grave if she heard me say Grandma Johnson. My grandma Johnson was 4'11", but she stood the tallest person in the room. She had love for everyone. She was an amazing cook. And she also, like most grandmas, did not play. Unless it was board games. Now, my grandma Johnson loved to play games like Crazy 8, Pokino, or you can relate, right? Crazy 8, Pokino, or Dominoes. Please don't get my grandmama on the Dominoes table because she was the most competitive person that I know. And I got to spend some good time with my grandmother. I remember one weekend I was spending time with my grandma Johnson and we were playing Pokino. And if you don't know what that is, you can just think of it as Black Bingo, but it's called Pokino, right? We were playing Pokino and she was whooping my tail because she was not going to let me win just because I was her grandson, right? She was whooping me and I'm trying to catch up and we heard a car pull in front of her house. Now, my grandma was stealth. Before I knew it, she had gotten up out of that seat, pulled that curtain back, because, by the way, the window was open because we were using the box fan and not the good working air conditioner that for some reason she didn't want to use. But she pulled the curtain back and said, "Move that car from in front of my house." Now, you would have thought that I was the driver of that car. It's crazy. I was looking for keys, trying to get up and go get it done. But what do you think happened? That person got back in their car and they moved it. It was my first time witnessing what I now know and call the power of the little L. You see, as someone who has now been in the management and leadership field for over 20 years, because, by the way, there is a distinct difference and delineation between management and leadership. I've made some mistakes, but I've learned so many invaluable lessons. One of those lessons that I learned was the fact that in 2024, we are, I believe, in a second pandemic. No, not a health pandemic, but we are in a pandemic of a lack of underskilled, underdeveloped, and underprepared leaders, let alone managers. And those underskilled, underdeveloped, and underprepared managers are creating a workplace that no one wants to be in from 9 to 5, let alone give what we like to think of as the differential extra time and effort. Because when you're working under a leader that supports you, that sees you, that values you, that recognizes what you bring to the table, you will do anything, including walk through a brick wall if you could, climb a mountain if you could, because that leader would do the same for you. So my mission today is to inspire you, encourage you, and to remind you that yes, although we are in a pandemic of a lack and underskilled leadership, we are also in an abundance of people like you and me who may not have positions, but have an opportunity to transform not just our families, not just our communities, but the workplace and the world. I remember many years later, after that movement of the car situation, I was in a leadership meeting. It was actually one of my first leadership meetings because I had worked my way up from front or entry level, management to, at this point, director level management. And unfortunately, there's this misnomer belief that we are supposed to look up to people because of their titles and forget that these people are also people who should respect you because you are a person. And so I'm in this meeting and I'm listening, right? But I'm also sharing. I'm asking questions. I'm pointing out things that don't align with what I believe and what I value and what I believe this company believes and values. And so I'm asking those questions. I'm pointing out things. I'm sharing my POV, not knowing the whole time there was what I like to think of as a big L leader in the room, watching me, taking notes. And at the end of that meeting, that big L leader came up to me and said the words no one really wants to hear after a meeting. She said, "Can I give you some feedback?" You all heard it. You've been there before. But me being naive at that time, I said, "Sure, of course, you can give me feedback." So she proceeds to share with me. She said, "Robert, you have a way of sharing the dissenting opinion." And I'm looking like, whoa, wow, that's cool. All the time, I had no clue what the word dissenting meant. But after that meeting, I went and I looked it up. What I realized she was sharing with me that I was willing to stand out and not blend in, to share my voice, to stand in my truth, and to reflect the best interests of the people who weren't in the room, because we all know we all want somebody to stand up and represent and reflect our best values at every table that our name is mentioned at. That was my first time recognizing my use of my own little L. You see, the little L is the person that maybe you were the first in your family to change a generational cycle. Maybe you were the first to go to college. Maybe you're the first to enter corporate America. Maybe you were first to manage money in a way that you had never learned or seen. And so now you have career opportunities and changed the whole generational course of your family. The little L leader is the person in the workplace that says, "This is not right, and I will stand here until we get it right, or I will walk out if it is not made right." Teach us. The little L leader operates without position, but most certainly with purpose. And I want to remind each and every one of us in here tonight that you may not have the position, but the position does not dismiss your responsibility to walk in your purpose. And so after that meeting and leaning into my little L self, being proud of me, I remember years after that, I was in another meeting, but I did a different tactic, if you will. I used a different strategy. I went in with ears wide open to listen. Because one of the best skills that you can learn in life as an adult, as a professional, is that you learn more and you can contribute more when you sit posture to listen. So I listened. And in this meeting, we were all giving updates, each person around the table. And by the time we got to the middle of it, everybody's kind of in their groove. And so one of my colleagues who was in his groove, so I thought, began to share his updates in a clear and concise way. But those big L leaders in the room, the ones that are about grand gestures, and this is my team, and I have the grandest vision, began to ask him question after question after question after question. And you could see him shrink farther and farther to seat. I can tell you can relate, because I could as well. While everyone else in the room said, and I could see it on their faces, "Thank God, not me." And if we're honest, sometimes we've been that person ourselves. But when I thought back about what my grandma Johnson, I decided to peel back my distance and speak in corporate speak. This is not the place, the culture, the values that I signed up for. When I agreed to join this company, the sign on the wall said that trust was being served. Trust and respect was being served. Collaboration was being served. But that's not what was happening in this moment. Now, Just like everyone prior to that was looking like, thank God, not me. The big leaders in the room were looking at me as if to say, how dare you? That's the power of the little L. It gives you strength, courage, and might to stand up and to step up when others are willing to sit back and stand down. But what would my Grandma Johnson say? Let alone what would my mama say? One thing about my mama is that she's always taught me that everyone deserves love, respect, compassion, consideration, and to be safe, seen, valued, and heard in your presence. And so I leaned into that moment, and although there was, as we like to say, repercussions and consequences of that decision, more than repercussions and consequences were rewards. The rewards, for example, were that the person that I stood up for, spoke up for, and advocated for felt safe in my presence. Each of us will have an opportunity to be tested on our values, our virtues, and our beliefs. That test does not always come at our own expense in terms of we're defending ourselves. In the workplace, particularly in 2024, we need to stand up and step up for each other. We can't wait for that big L leader who is building big teams and pursuing big strategies and wanting to be the best performer. We collectively can transform this world by standing as one, serving from our individual pots. So you might be asking, Robert, how do I find my little L power? I'm glad you asked. You all asked really, really great questions. And there's 3 questions I'm going to share with you that I want you to not only think about in this moment, but when you leave here, I hope that you ruminate on them. I hope that you write down the answers to these questions and begin to operationalize, as we like to say, what the outcomes are. Before I get to the first question, I want to give you an example of how your little L will come to life for you. They like to say, and maybe I heard it in church, but I know I've heard it before. It says, your pain is also where and therein where your purpose lies. So the first question I want you to ask yourself is, who am I called to be? In those meetings, I knew what my purpose was. One was to be curious. The other was to listen so that I could then respond and not react in support of my colleague. Oprah says, we all have a purpose and our greatest job in life is to get to work to find it. But you can't find your purpose if you're not asking the tough questions. And sometimes the tough question of who am I called to be is so uncomfortable that we dare not ask. But I challenge you to ask yourself, who am I called to be? See, my mother and my grandmothers knew that they were called to be mothers, and they operationalized and did their mothering amazingly well. The second question I want you to ask yourself is, how am I called to be who I'm called to be? Because it's one thing to know my purpose. It's another thing to know, how do I fulfill this thing called purpose and this thing called life? Because life. And we can get distracted. We can get anxious. We can be nervous. We can be uncertain. But when you know how you're supposed to be, who you're called to be, you become an unstoppable force. And so let me tell you how you can find that out. Think about the natural skills and talents and abilities that you were born with. Yes, that is a very important part of identifying your purpose. Some people have an amazing ability to just be the best energy in the room. It's a gift to be the light, you know. Some people have an amazing ability to cook a meal that is comparable to Michelin star restaurants, yet serve it to those in need. Whether your gift is the art of communication or the gift of patience, because that's also a necessary gift to fulfill purpose, it is essential. You are essential. So the second question is, how am I called to be who I'm called to be? The third question, most of us, I think, spend a lot of time thinking about without realizing that we're actually doing the work. We've all been called to serve everyone, but at the same time, someone in particular. I'm going to say that again. We've all been called to serve everyone, but at the same time, someone in particular. What do I mean by that? If you're called to be a leader, which we all are called, but you're called to lead a team, each member of that team will have a specific need, nuanced and different than the other. So you're serving all, but you still have to know how to lead and serve that one. And remember, you don't need the title. And in fact, in most organizations, it is the people without the big titles and the big positions. I see you. I see you. You're vibing with me. I see you. It is those folks who tend to be the biggest advocates, allies, supporters, and actually affect transformational change. So as I begin to land this plane, I want to remind you, all of us literally are born for and with a purpose. And when you leave here tonight, those three questions, I hope they ring in your ears until you wake up tomorrow and have some answers. Who am I called to be? How am I called to be? Who I've been called to be? And who have I been called to serve? Because even on the journey of answering each of those questions, you will affect positive change. Because if I know who I am, then I can show up myself, unafraid to challenge, unafraid to be curious, but also unafraid to be humble. Rosa Parks sat because she was tired. Dr. King marched because he was motivated. Maya Angelou wrote and recited because she was inspired. What will you do because of your why, because of your who, because of your how? Now you might be thinking, I can't boil the ocean. If I jump in here, it's just going to be too much. Well, guess what? You're right. So we don't want you to try to boil the ocean. But guess what? If you boil the water in your pot and you serve from that pot, before you know it, the sum of our water and our pots becomes the sum of a pond. And that pond, the sum of a lake. And that lake, the sum of a river. And before we know it, dare we believe it, we have boiled the ocean as a collective people operating within the power of our little L.